What if being misgendered was actually a sign of progress? Let's talk about it. Now, I know this is very controversial, and you might be thinking, why is a somatic therapist and nutritionist talking about this? Well, to me, it's kind of interlinked. It's an interdependent conversation about identity, relating, and how we relate and connect to our bodies, and how much we depend on other people to see us a certain way in order to feel safe. It's also a big part of my work, teaching people the difference between harm and difference, harm and disagreeing, harm and someone just doesn't like what I like or believe in what I believe in. When you can tell the difference, life gets a lot easier. And when you have PTSD and chronic stress and insomnia, and your body has a very low capacity for stress, it can be really hard to tell the difference. I've been there. Let me give you my little identity hall pass, if you will, which is the little card I keep in my mind that gives me access to talk about some of these things because of my history. I'm an intersex bisexual man. That doesn't mean I'm trans. It means I was born with an ambiguous biology. And for me, I was born with an ambiguous hormonal expression. I had estrogen dominance from birth until I was around 15 years old. I developed breasts, I developed hips. I felt very feminine. I could not put on muscle. And I had massive sex dysphoria and gender dysphoria and body dysmorphia for most of my childhood. It wasn't until my body stopped blocking my testosterone and I started naturally having a second puberty, which it felt like, as a boy, that I started really getting confused. Because doctors told me, well, once you go through puberty, your breasts will just disappear, or as they referred to them, the fat on your chest. So I have a history in dysphoria. I have a history in thinking I was born in the wrong body, and I know the pleasure and joy and relief that comes from having top surgery. It changed my life, and I had it when I was 23. And ever since then, I'm 37 now, so what, 14 years? Ever since then, I have been integrating my masculinity more and more and more and getting more comfortable as a man. But it's been a long road. So everything I'm about to say, I say with a open heart, but I say with a lot of experience. When I was growing up in the 90s, if you wore nail polish to school, you were beat up. You were called you were called a sissy, you were called gay, you were called a you name it. So you didn't do that. You didn't even go to school with anything like a flower or anything pink or anything too rosy red on if you were a boy. So I'm fascinated by this recent experience where people will go into spaces with, let's say, a biological male will go into a space with nail polish and a dress and nothing else. So sometimes a beard, very masculine presenting, but wearing a dress and nail polish and wanting to be called she, her. And someone says, hey, sir, or hey, man, or what can I get for you, my friend, or mister, right? Maybe not my friend, that's a little neutral, but mister. And the individual gets really triggered and gets angry. It says, you misgender me. This is transphobic. This is harmful. I actually see this as a sign of progress. The fact that you can walk into a space presenting as a male, being biologically male, wearing women's clothing, and you're not laughed at immediately, and you're revered with sir, a respectful term for a man, tells me how much progress we've made around gender roles. And it has me thinking about the conflation of gender and sex. And I think this is why we're all so confused about these queer LGBTQ identities, which have gotten very big very quickly. And whenever the fringe meets the mainstream, there's a lot of confusion because people appropriate things and try things on and they become trends instead of actual culture. And that's what I've seen happen within the trans umbrella over the last 10 years or so. The most important thing for me is the difference between sex and gender. Sex is your biology, gender is your identity. It's your expression, it's your fashion, it's your role, and it's even your stereotyping. So, a lot of people are stereotyped in a way they don't like based on their sex. Whereas other people, transsexuals, people who have gender or sex dysphoria, especially, they feel so uncomfortable with their sex, their physical body, that they have to go into medical, which could be hormones, or surgical intervention in order to feel safe and function in their lives. This is very different from somebody who is non binary or gender fluid and just wants to change their pronouns, but doesn't need any kind of hormonal or surgical intervention to feel safe. So we want to understand there's a big difference here with what we're calling trans and what we're calling gender fluid or non binary. I don't think the two should go together. I think it doesn't serve the actual transsexuals who have sex dysphoria, who really need the medical care for their mental health and their lives to be able to function. Now, where does intersex fall into all this? Intersex people are often used as a talking point with gender ideology and gender theory. And the talking point is essentially like this: intersex people prove that sex is on a spectrum. And I would agree. For intersex people, which is less than 2% of the population. So there is a small amount of us who are born into ambiguous bodies that we have no control over. And it's those actual individuals who are on a spectrum of sex within one body and who experience a lot of harm at the hands of doctors and medical communities who assign them male or female at birth through some kind of genital mutilation or hormonal intervention without the child's consent because they're too young to consent. So their lives are essentially a lie. They never really know how they were born, what their true nature is of their body, but they always feel like something's off, something's not right. I consider myself very lucky to not have the full ambiguous genitalia expression. Mine was hormonal, which was very difficult, but I wasn't put in a position of having any kind of genital mutilation, which is extremely scarring and traumatic for a child as they develop. Never having orgasms, possibly being infertile, not being able to feel whole in their sexuality or in parts of their body because they were surgically altered at some point in their life in order to assign them into one sex category because the ambiguity was too much for the medical industry to hold. I didn't have that situation, but I did have the experience where they weren't able to classify me as intersex, so they just called me male. Had they been more curious, they would have seen I had an estrogen dominance, that my breasts were 99% breast tissue and not fat, that I had expanding hips, and I had a very, very feminized estrogen dominant body that needed some kind of hormonal intervention for me to develop more as a boy, which could have really helped me. It could have helped me avoid a lot of trauma and sexual assault and harassment and bullying. I was so hated in middle school that a teacher had to escort me from classroom to classroom because the threats to my lives were that intense from the kids I went to school with. I say all this because when I watch someone who's non binary or who considers themselves trans but presents as male or female and wants to be seen as the opposite, get really upset when someone misgenders them, I want us to understand there's a difference between harmful misgendering and someone just seeing your sex for what it is and speaking to you as such without knowing you. And the difference is kind of like knowing someone's astrological sign. I can't look at you and know you're a Virgo, but when you tell me, I can do my best to remember. Now, intentional misgendering, something that gets labeled as transphobia often, is when someone is clearly female or male presenting and or has told you very clearly how they like to be addressed, and you consistently call them the opposite in a way that hurts them and you harass them with that. That's where it starts to become transphobic, and that's where it starts going into harassment. However, I think it's important for young kids who consider themselves queer and trans and non-binary to realize that the world can't orient to you. You are part of a fringe. When I was growing up, we didn't have people orienting to us that were in institutions or government roles or even parents or adults. We oriented to ourselves because we were a subculture, and we took the responsibility on us to affirm ourselves and one another, and we let other people think whatever they wanted to think about us. And there's a great power in that. There's a great power to find the safety in yourself and in the community around you and not try to fight the people outside of that community who just don't understand or don't want to understand. And this is where it becomes political for me. I believe in free speech, and I believe in the kind of free speech that includes offensive speech and offensive expression. I believe everyone has the right to say something offensive because I have the ability to either take offense or not. And the more comfortable I've gotten with myself over the years, the less offendable I am. And people have said some pretty vile, offensive things to me online, homophobic things, intersex phobic things, really disgusting, vile comments. And they don't offend me. In fact, I feel more bad for them because I can't imagine taking my time to say something horrible to somebody who I must be or how I must be living or feeling to project that onto a complete stranger, especially someone that's just coming online to make educational videos to help people. So I say this because somatic psychology, what I have trained in and what I practice and what I teach, have helped me access this ability to not be so offended by nearly anything because I'm able to feel into myself and notice the difference between how you see me and how I connect to myself. And it's a brilliant life to live who you are, to live an honest expression of yourself, and to let people have their own story they want to have of you. So I'm sharing this whole thing because I find it fascinating that some people are misgendered because people just can't know how you identify when you present opposite than how you want to be seen. But also think at the same time, what a privilege to live in an era where as a man, as a biological man, someone presenting male can walk into a space, into public with a dress and be called sir. That's pretty amazing compared to what it was like when I was growing up. Now, that's not always the case. I know people can walk into establishments wearing uh, gender opposing, let's say, cross gender clothing and fashion, and they can get laughed at and made fun of, and sometimes bullied, sometimes even worse. However, the majority of people I see online and the people I've spoken to who have felt harmed by being misgendered are people who were just accurately clocked based on the sex they were born into, not assigned. And if I have any blessing or hope or suggestion or advice to impart on anyone who's navigating that kind of identity or that kind of culture, it's this: don't look to other people for your safety. Don't look to other people to affirm you. Affirm yourself. Feel really settled in yourself and see what it's like to live your life from that standpoint. Because my teachers, some of my best teachers, were gay men from the 50s, men who were gay bashed, men who were set up in urinals with policemen to arrest them if they looked at the other person, men that dealt with AIDS and lost dozens of their friends, men who dealt with some of the most traumatic harm around their sexuality, and who still emerged preferring free speech, who still emerged preferring people to be offensive, and who emerged with such a resilience and solidity, you couldn't knock them over if you tried. So I want you to consider that. See where it lands in your body and see where it takes you. And feel free to disagree with me. I love to hear all viewpoints, but I will not respond to anything that's hateful or accusatory. I'm not interested in that. But I am interested in what you really feel and what you think, and questions and comments. So I'll look below. See you next time. Thank you for watching today's episode. Please like and subscribe if you found it useful, and let me know in the comments what you want me to cover next. I have developed a 4-week self-paced course that takes 18 years of my personal and professional experience and puts it into one place where you can easily and quickly learn the foundations of recovering from stress and trauma. How does the food you eat affect your stress levels? How do the relationships in your life create stress or peace? How does the relationship you have with your body allow you to feel happier and more settled? I will cover all this and so much more in this 4-week self-paced course. And the best part, it's self-paced. You don't have to sign up at a certain date or finish it at a certain time. It's yours for life, and it's waiting there for you when you're ready to finish it. Throughout this course, I'll be teaching you philosophies and practices that combine my 3 favorite modalities: somatic experiencing, embodied parts work, and nutrition. For more information on this course, click on the link in my episode details.